Hey everyone, this is Brown at IF Brown, and tonight we're going to be talking about Forever Knight, Season 2 on DVD. So just to catch everyone up here, Forever Knight was a TV show that was on in the 90s, and it ran for 3 years, but in that 3-year time, it amassed something of a significant cult following. The show itself managed to combine elements of police procedurals, crime dramas, and gothic vampire fiction to result in something of a unique hybrid of a cop show. The basic setup of it was that the character of Detective Nicholas Knight, or Nick Knight, as played by the actor Geraint Davies, was secretly a vampire who was over 800 years old and was trying to find a measure of redemption for his crimes and misdeeds that he had committed as a vampire in his lifetime against humanity. And so somewhere along the way, the guilt-stricken part of him had won out against the predator part of him. And so he broke from his vampire companions and decided to enlist in the police department of Toronto as a detective who only worked nights, but nonetheless excelled at his job and made every effort to fight crime and help the innocent. And joining him were the characters of Dr. Natalie Lambert, as played by Catherine Disher, as well as the character of Detective Don Schanke, as played by John Kapelos. And Natalie Lambert was a forensic specialist who stumbled upon Nick's secret, but is nonetheless working with him to try and find a cure for his vampirism. And the two of them are very close friends, but there's also a bit of an element of mutual attraction between the two, sort of a will they or won't they type of vibe at times. And the character of Detective Don Schanke was a veteran of the force who had a rather humorous exterior, sometimes overly humorous at times, but this humor was often something that masked the sort of conflicting emotions he had with, on one hand, working on the force and coming up against some very difficult cases, as well as, and at times, strenuous home life, because, he's dividing his time between his wife and kid and, the rigors of working, the night shift on the force. But Schanke is the one who is ultimately partnered with Nick, and the two of them have a sort of an odd couple type relationship, because on one hand, Skanke's overly humorous personality clashes with Nick's more straight-laced and even-keeled personality, and so basically, funny man and straight man, but at times the roles are kind of flip-flopped, whereas Schanke will be the more on edge one and Nick will be the more laid back one, so they sort of rub off on each other, and that was always a rather interesting dynamic. You also had the characters of Janette, as played by Debrah Duchene, who was one of the vampires that ran with Nick back in the day, but she has gone on to make her base of operations in Canada and is in charge of a nightclub called The Raven, which caters almost exclusively to vampire clientele, although they do allow some humans in there from time to time for obvious reasons. But nonetheless, though, she and Nick oftentimes cross paths with one another because, since she's in the vampire world, she has her ear to the ground and will, oftentimes have information pertaining to a case that Nick is working on, especially if it involves elements of their fellow vampires. But you also had the character of Lucian Lacroix, as played by Nigel Bennett, who was in fact the one who turned Nick and Janette into vampires a long time ago, and so he was their father, so to speak. But Lacroix was definitely the most bloodthirsty of the three, and um, and the fact that Nick broke away from them to try and find some path of redemption, as well as the fact that he's trying to find a cure for his vampirism, it hurt Lacroix, and so he was kind of a thorn in Nick's side over the years after Nick broke from them. But he was seemingly killed at the beginning of season 1, but he shows up at the end of season 1, somehow alive, but very pissed off, and he takes a more prominent role in season 2, because in season 1, with the exception of his apparent death at the beginning of season 1, he showed up predominantly in flashbacks and hallucinations that Nick experienced at times, in which you learned about Nick's time as a vampire throughout the ages. But anyway, though, the character of Lacroix takes a far more active role in this season after he's come back from the dead. And so, but those were the main characters that were in season 1 and continue to be main characters in season 2. But there are a few changes, though. Namely, the character of Captain Stonetree, as played by veteran character actor Gary Farmer, he was written out for one reason or another, as having been assigned to a different precinct, and in his place is the character of, let's see, Captain Amanda Cohen, as played by actress Natsuko Ohama, and she proves to be a less agreeable captain of the police department, as far as whereas Stonetree cut Schanke and Knight a lot more slack in their cases, Cohen was a lot more by the book and straight-laced, so to speak. Not that Stonetree wasn't straight-laced, but it's just that Cohen was more like, she didn't cut anywhere near as much slack as Stonetree did, but she nonetheless proves to be a valuable ally to them as the season goes on, because she does realize that the two of them have a unique working relationship that results in a significant closure of cases, despite the fact that there are a lot of eccentricities involved, oftentimes because of Detective Knight's nocturnal nature, because his cover story is that he's allergic to sunlight, and that's why he works only at night. And so, she does eventually come to cut them some slack in that regard. But beyond that, they're kind of like, they're constantly having to, keep things in line with each other, as well as, trying to, make sure that, everything, meets with her approval. And so, so that was one of the, major changes as far as season 2 goes. But the other thing that I think was apparent in season 2 is that, the creative team in charge of putting things together, I think they made more of an effort to explore some of the, background and mythology and ideas of the show, as far as the vampire lore and what have you. But you also have character arcs in a couple of episodes that give a little more fleshing out to some of the main characters. to where, you compare them to season one. I mean, they still have, the traits that made them who they are, but they become a lot more nuanced, as other reviewers have pointed out, for season two. The character of Detective Schanke takes on a bit more of a darker tone at times. I mean, he still has that humorous touch to him that makes him who he is as a character, but you also see a sort of an anger to him at times, depending on what the cases are. And so you also see him as a detective. In some episodes, he comes across as a lot more competent than he was in season one. But unfortunately, that's not consistent from episode to episode. But you watch season two and compare it to season one, he does come across as more believable as a detective. For the most part. I think one of my favorite bits with his character was that one of the last episodes of season two actually has him come very close to finding out the truth about Nick, because while he is Nick's partner, he doesn't know the truth about him, but in this particular episode, it's called Close Call. He actually manages to come, very close to, connecting the dots, blowing the lid off of things, and, basically bringing some exposure to the vampire world, which, naturally would be a very bad thing, for both vampires and humanity. And so it's rather interesting, seeing John Kapelos, go through, the mental gymnastics that the character of Schanke is going through here, because I mean, he's really putting in everything, or the character's really putting in everything he has as a detective to try and figure things out, and it takes minor spoiler, it takes Lacroix of all people to basically turn him away from the truth, so to speak. But it's interesting how he does it, though, because something very strenuous happened to him in the episode, to where it affected his outlook on things, to where ordinarily he's basically grown to accept Nick in his eccentric nature, but he's also gotten to a point where I guess that he's worked with Nick for so long that any sort of mesmerism or hypnotism effect that Nick sometimes had on him, as far as when he tried to convince him of something or make him forget something, he's somehow, or I guess inadvertently, he's developed a bit of a resistance to the hypnotic effect that vampires have on humans, and so that makes things even more tricky. But because of this, though, he's able to focus a lot more, and so I think that was definitely one of my favorite episodes, just because you see John Kapelos being able to give a lot more of a nuanced portrayal to the character of Schanke, and the fact that like I said, he comes that close to figuring out the truth about Nick, and the fact that the vampires, they can't just hypnotize him and make him forget it, because he remembers it just a few minutes later, or as far as the stuff he's learned. It just you kind of see Lacroix put into a position to where he can't just pull a mental whammy on the guy, and he can't just kill him either, because he kills him, then that's inevitably going to draw some attention to the vampire world in some way, and so it was a very fascinating predicament, for all involved. But it was definitely one of the standout episodes. And that's another thing I was going to say is that season 1 was good. Make no mistake. Dated for its time, cheesy at times, but if you grew up with stuff from the 80s and 90s, I mean, it's a good show. It was a good first season. But one of the things that I will say that season 2 was better with, say in comparison to season 1, is that season 1, on a whole, I think was good, but in hindsight, there wasn't really an episode that I would say was great. But season 2, in comparison, actually has a handful of episodes that I would actually call great. I mean, not every episode is great. I mean, like any other season of a show, there are, some episodes that are, I'm not going to say bad, but, they're not as, good or great in comparison. In fact, I mean, season 2 even has, one episode that I would consider a clunker. And I think it was called Amateur Hour, or Amateur Night, I think is what it was called. But basically, Amateur Night, I think, or Hour, was, I think the reason I found it to be one of the weaker episodes, and, the one episode I would say was close to being bad, it was because it tried to combine two very different stories into one episode. One being very dark and serious, and the other being, farcical and comical. And the serious story involved gang activity and a drive-by shooting that resulted in a lot of people getting killed at a public playground, including kids. And considering, when this season came out, 94, 95, I mean, the way they did it was actually, rather shocking. I mean, not like all-out gore fest or anything like that, but the fact that, little kids were shown to have been shot and killed in this drive-by shooting. I mean, it was one of those moments where it kind of, whoa. I mean, you don't expect to see that on a show from the early 90s. So at least it's not something that I necessarily expected to see. I mean, because at this point in time, for the most part, if a kid was in danger, I mean, yes, there was depending on how well the show is executed. I mean, there might have been some tension as to are the heroes going to get the kid out in time? And 9 times out of 10 they did. But I guess this is one of those instances where nope. A lot of people got killed, including the kids, in this drive-by shooting. So it's like you have that, harsh reality come into play. But then in the second half of the show, I mean, they focus on in the second half of this episode of the show, they have this actress who's trying to do research in her role as a police officer, and that plot aspect, I mean, there were some funny moments, especially in her interactions with Schanke and Detective Knight. But the thing is, when you open an episode with a drive-by shooting that results in kids getting killed, that it's kind of you can't really suddenly throw in this out of left field, basically sitcom-ish episode into the same story. It's just it's a colliding mishmash that doesn't work. Now by themselves, I mean, if the episode had focused, say, solely on Nick and Schanke, or the whole police force trying to find these killers, and I mean, they could have focused on the dangers of gangland activity, and or something like that. I mean, that would have been a good standalone episode. And then they could have had another standalone episode, focusing on this actress, who's kind of a bimbo, trying to do her research in the part, and that could have been sort of a comical episode, a standalone episode, like to sort of balance things out. But trying to throw two together, it didn't work. And so, even though I think season 2 is overall better than season 1, ironically, season 2 thus far has the one episode of the 2 seasons that I would say was close to being bad. But anyway, though, aside from that episode, I mean, overall, the episodes tend to be good. With the acting and writing being consistently engaging. And even though there is an element of predictability that's kind of inevitable with shows from this time, it's things are done well enough to where one is willing to go along with the ride. And because if you've made it this far into the series, I'm guessing that like myself, you become engaged with the stories of the main characters, and you're wanting to see what happens next. And so while the season is still episodic in nature, much like the season 1 was, the fact that there are a handful of episodes that are great, basically it all just kind of comes back to how that makes it stand out over season 1. A couple of other episodes that I thought were what you call great. I mean, there was there were let's see, things that dealt with the backstories of some of the main characters. Like there was an episode called "A Fate Worse Than Death" with more of a focus on the character Janette. And so it was interesting because usually whenever there's, say, an element of vampire lore that's built upon the series, it's been, say, in the form of like a flashback that Nick has. But in this case, though, Janette was the one who was given more focus as far as character development goes, and the flashbacks were from her perspective, and you basically see how she was basically put into a position where she was essentially a sex slave, and the time in which she was born into, and her lot in life. And it wasn't until Lacroix rescued her from being raped, and then turning her shortly thereafter. It was a rather intense. It was intense, because of if you look throughout history and even look through what's going on today in today's society. I mean, sex slavery or the sex trade or the skin trade, whatever it's called. I mean, it's still thriving. And so when you see something like that with a character who in, like, say, in season 1 was introduced as an assertive, confident character. I mean, seductive, yes, but I mean, she, basically stood on her own 2 feet and had a power all her own. But you see how she started out, though. I mean, you're kind of like, yeah, you definitely understand, why, she is the way she is about, say, being able to not let anyone, push her around and what have you. And so, I mean, that was definitely, one of the quote unquote darker episodes. But you also had, let's see, Hunted. There was this particular episode had a killer who was going around setting up people to hunt them for sport. And when you find out who the killer really is, I mean, it was a really interesting twist. I mean, like I said, I mean, most of the episodes are kind of predictable, so you can kind of see, who the killer is going to be. But the fact that they went as far as they did, with the killer's identity, it's just one of those moments where it kind of like, one, it turns out to be, spoiler, it turns out to be, a woman who's been doing it the whole time. And she's very good at it. And the fact that she proves to be as much of a threat as she is to Detective Knight, as well as everyone else she's gone after, I mean, they really did a good job of actually making her a danger. And so that was definitely something to see, because you saw, the characters, basically being put through the ringer, by, someone, you didn't think was going to be as dangerous as they were. And, they did a really good job with that. He also had faithful followers, in which Detective Knight basically goes undercover in a religious cult that basically focused on sunlight and moonlight and things like that, as a sort of religious experience. But basically, it was a commentary on the nature of cults that society has. And basically, Nick ends up becoming brainwashed for a period of time, and it basically plays havoc with his psyche, and how, he comes that close to basically becoming one of the cult for real. And so that was a rather interesting episode, because seeing Geraint and Davies sort of alternating between being himself, and as far as Nick Knight goes, but then also being subservient to the cult. And considering this was an early 90s TV show, they actually did a pretty good job of showing the seductive power that a cult can have over someone, whether it be a weak-willed person, or maybe someone who's strong-willed, but maybe they're going through a tumultuous time in their life, and someone latches onto them, and next thing you know, they're a member of a cult. And so Faithful Followers was definitely one of the more memorable episodes as well. But you also had episodes like Father's Day and Can't Run and Can't Hide. Father's Day was one of those deals where and you had a case that they were working on that involved say, on one hand you had this one guy who was the son of a mob boss who was trying to break away from the quote-unquote family business. And you also had the character of Lacroix getting involved, because it turns out that this mafia head had actually had interactions with both Lacroix and Knight a long time ago. And so you had Lacroix being the quote-unquote father of Nick. And so you had these, it was an interesting sort of compare and contrast. You had the mafia boss, or the mob boss, and his son trying to break away from him, and you had Lacroix and his son, Detective Knight, who had broken away from him. And so the dynamic between all these characters in this particular episode was very intriguing to see, and the payoff at the end was actually pretty cool, because once again, spoiler, basically Lacroix is once again the solution to the problem, or he basically allows for there to be a third option here, because initially it's a case of the mob boss and his henchmen either bring his son back to the fold, or they kill him, because you can't break with the family. But Lacroix provides a third option that, as startling as it is, it makes sense within the context of the series. But that's another thing about Lacroix in this season, is that while he also has a more prominent part, he also takes on something of an anti-heroic role at times, because he's still arguably a villain in the series, but at times though, he comes to the aid of Nick and Janette. And so and he oftentimes, even in flashbacks, along with getting more nuanced development, he also raises points that prove to be all too true. It's just because Nick's wanting to break away from him and his way of life. He doesn't want to hear the truth of what he has to say. But since Lacroix had the longer life experience as a vampire, I mean, even though he is evil, he oftentimes knows the truth about how things are going to go. And so I thought that was rather interesting. And Father's Day, I think, was one of those episodes that sort of exemplified that. But yeah, I think one of my personal favorite, or one of my personal favorites, was the episode "Can't Run, Can't Hide," and you had a story that kind of goes all the way back to the Vietnam War, and so I mean that's a war that oftentimes provides inspiration for all sorts of stories in many genres. But the way they pulled it off here was rather interesting, because you had a guy who was a part of a platoon that had taken a part in a wartime atrocity, and the guy who the story is focusing on was basically, much like Nick Knight, was guilt-stricken for his part in the slaughter of his fellow man, and basically tried to atone for it by essentially faking his death and becoming someone else. And basically he tried to mentor say disadvantaged youth, and he was very genuine about it. But unfortunately, though, someone from the past has come calling and is killing off the surviving members of the platoon, and he's one of the targets. And so Nick finds himself in Nick and Schanke are trying to find this guy so they can protect him from whoever's trying to kill him. But at the same time, as they're finding out more and more about it, Nick and Schanke, as well as Captain Cohen, they're all sort of debating on, okay, was this guy ever on the level as far as trying to turn his life around? I mean, was him trying to mentor a disadvantaged youth, I mean, just a smokescreen, or did he actually mean for it to be a form of redemption? And so with all that going on, inevitably Nick can't help but finding some form of empathy for the guy. But I did like how they touched on the trauma of the Vietnam War, and also the fact that anytime war's going on, I mean, there are people who seek revenge for their losses. And so once you find out who the killer is of the surviving platoon members, I mean, it taps into the vampire lore in a very interesting way, but also you understood the character's motivation. And so I thought that was definitely one of the episodes that was one of my favorites. But then again, I'm a sucker for stuff that deals with like say World War II, or Vietnam War, and things like that. Especially if it if it sort of coincides with or intersects with the horror genre, which Forever Night kind of is. But yeah, there was also an episode or two that dealt with say the supernatural in a way that seemed to kind of go beyond just the vampire aspect of the show. Like there was an episode called Near Death, which tends to be a fan favorite if the reviews are anything to go by, wherein you take the premise of Flatliners, the movie Flatliners, the Joel Schumacher movie Flatliners. It had Kiefer Sutherland, Julia Roberts, Kevin Bacon, a whole bunch of people in there. But basically Nick finds himself in a position to where he's able to, with the assistance of this doctor who's trying to create near-death experiences to try and find what's beyond, if there's anything beyond death. Nick wants to use this to test it out for himself, because he being the conflicted individual that he is, I mean, he wants to know. I mean, he wants to see if he can find something that can answer his question on a spiritual level. Basically, I mean, is he damned to hell? Does he have a shot at heaven? Or is he just going to be, I mean, or should he just stick with the path that he's on right now? Hopefully find some form of atonement in the fact that he's trying to protect the innocent and fight crime in Toronto. But yeah, Near Death, though, was definitely a cool episode because, I mean, while yes, the supernatural aspect was predominantly tied to the vampire lore of the series, you got the idea that on a spiritual level, there was a lot more at work than just humanity and vampires. Like you saw, the idea and notions of there being spiritual beings at work. I mean, while granted they aren't exactly named, it's just there's enough of an implication there that there's a bigger game being played. And while it just touched on it, I thought that it was very fascinating. And episodes that deal with say someone being dead for a short period of time and then maybe having a near-death experience and then coming back to life and trying to remember it or something like that. I mean, I've always found stuff like that interesting, but they did a really good job of that, especially with the vampire lore and context. And once again, the character of Lacroix plays a part, especially in terms of him being sort of a spiritual avatar in Nick's near-death experience and his vision, if as it were. Except it's not really Lacroix. It's whoever or whatever it is that's basically serving as the keeper of the gate between life and death. It just happens to take the form of Lacroix, but once again it allows for Nigel Bennett to exercise his acting chops. And so it was really interesting because Nigel Bennett, I mean, as Lacroix, oftentimes has a rather darkly comical or snarky demeanor, or he can just be downright frightening with his intensity in his anger towards Nick as well as humanity in general. But here, though, I mean, yes, he's in the form of Lacroix, but because it's basically another spiritual entity just using the form of Lacroix, you see Nigel Bennett, acting in a way that is different. And so I thought that was a really, interesting touch to the episode. But yeah, this was I think the other episode that I think definitely stands out as one of the great episodes. It was called A More Permanent Hell, and at least as far as this DVD set has it listed, it's the next to last episode of the season. And in my opinion, it should have been the season finale simply because of, how well done it is and how intense it is, because it deals with Nick and Schanke and a couple of other members in the police department investigating a suicide at an observatory, and they find out that the scientist who committed suicide did so because they discovered that there was an asteroid heading towards Earth that's going to destroy it in 3 months. And so and basically, the people who are on the scene are kind of sworn to secrecy because, if this information gets out to the public, there's going to be massive panic, anarchy, what have you. And so initially, you see, the main characters, trying to, cope with it all. And, it's not pretty. It's like any form of, putting things off with a sense of humor, it's gone. And so, but unfortunately, this information gets out, And sure enough, it's anarchy, the world over. And so while the episode, much like the rest of the series, the present day is set in Toronto, you see snippets of worldwide chaos, like courtesy of news footage. And considering that this episode, this series is from the early '90s, they actually did a pretty good job of making it look like the end was nigh, in a TV series. And it's pretty spooky because you look at the stuff that's gone on lately. You've had COVID, you've had race riots, you've had natural disasters that have had sort of an end of the world type level of threat attached to them. And of course, we're all, most of us are still here, thankfully, but at the time when these things were going on, it was the end of the world was coming. And so in this episode, A More Permanent Hell did a really good job of capturing that intensity. And so I don't want to spoil everything here simply because of how great the episode is, but I think it's safe to say that this asteroid doesn't actually hit Earth, considering that there's a third season of the show, and also this being a cop show from the '90s, the main characters, they figure something out, and the day is saved in the nick of time, but the way it's done though, the trick, the twist, that was well done. I don't want to spoil what the twist was exactly, but the thing is, even when the twist came into play and you saw the trick for what it was, the fact that basically the world was convinced that it was going to be, the people the world over were convinced that the world was going to come to an end, and we were that close to, basically national chaos, or worldwide chaos. At least as far as the show goes, it was pretty effective. But yeah, I think just overall, the season itself is good, but the fact that some of the episodes managed to be great, it does manage to basically put it just a little bit over season one with respect to season one, because season one was still good. It's just that while it was consistently good, there wasn't anything that was particularly great, if that makes sense. Whereas here, while it was good across the board, those moments of greatness managed to make it stand out just a tad more. I will say that there were certain bits where I think they could have improved. Case in point, you had that one episode, like I talked about earlier, where they tried to throw two episodes into one, and it was a really bad mishmash of things. But we've already talked that to death. But one other thing that I think could have been handled better was the sort of will they or won't they type of storyline that was going on with Nick and Natalie, Detective Knight and Dr. Lambert, as it were, because the two of them already have really good chemistry, and even going back as far as season one, there is an element of mutual attraction there. It's just that it seemed to be something that was gradually building, but there is an episode in which the two of them they actually come very close to becoming lovers. And it's not that that would be a bad development because of the natural chemistry between the two and the fact that the two of them are characters who care for one another, but it's just that it feels like the progression to near lovers type of relationship felt kind of rushed, and it felt like they were doing it simply because it was a Valentine's Day themed episode. And it wasn't a bad episode, but it's just that I think if they were going to do that, it would have been better if I, I don't know. It's hard to describe, but I just felt like they could have, if they were going to do something like that, it would have been more effective if the, say, romantic angle had been developed along with the friendship angle, because the friendship angle was excuse me, the friendship angle had already been developed more than well enough at this point. But if the romantic angle had been, say, developed, say, just as much as the friendship angle it had, I think I would have bought the romance, as far as this particular episode goes, a lot more easily than I did, as it was otherwise, put out to us. But like I said, it wasn't a bad episode. It's just that, yeah, that the romantic angle seemed rushed, in my opinion. Also, the other thing is that it feels like some of the episodes, at least as far as the DVD set goes, might be out of order, because the way some of the characters act in a couple of the episodes, and when the episodes are arranged as far as the DVD set goes, some of their portrayals, don't quite match up, if that makes any sense. Like, say, for instance, one character has a certain amount of character development in one episode, but then the very next episode, they're back to what they were beforehand, prior to this character development. And so it feels like some of the episodes might have been out of order. And, case in point, the very last episode, I believe, is called Blood Money, and it's not. Once again, it's not much like a lot of the other episodes. It's not a bad episode. It's just that, considering that this came on the heels of the vastly superior, A More Permanent Hell, it was going to be it was a letdown, simply because of that, but also simply because of it felt like a one and done story that you could have seen at the start of season 2, or even say, for instance, if it felt like something that if it had been made in season 1, it would have been more in line with things. But here in season 2, it just felt like sort of same old, and the fact that it was the last episode of the season, there really wasn't anything to say make it special, other than the fact that Geraint Davies, I believe it was his first time trying to direct an episode, and so I think the episode's significant in that regard. But as a storyline, it just it felt like, in some ways, an inferior take on the vastly superior Father's Day episode, in a sense that you had a father who was in charge of a vast financial empire, not a criminal empire in this case, but a financial empire, and you had the son who wanted to break away from things, except the son's more than a bit of a screw up in this case, as opposed to, say, someone who's trying to break away from a crime family for a better life, that kind of thing. So it felt like an inferior take on that episode as well. So and I looked online, I was looking on IMDb, and it shows like the air dates of the episodes, the original air dates, and apparently this episode was originally earlier on in the season. So I'm not really sure why they put this episode last on the DVD set. So yeah, I guess that would be the main thing. And also, much like season 1, there's unfortunately not an option for subtitles, but I will say that there is a slight improvement with this DVD set over that of season 1, in the sense that there are some extras. A couple of episodes actually have commentary tracks, Not every single episode. In fact, I think it might have only been 3 episodes, like the very first episode of the season, and then the last 2, I believe. But just the fact that there are extras along those lines for the series is more than a little impressive, because I mean, one of the complaints I had about season 1, not so much as a season, but as far as the DVD set goes, was that while it was nicely packaged, there was literally nothing in the way of extras. It was a bare bones release as far as that goes, but apparently that was a common enough complaint, so that when the DVD set for season 2 came out, the people who put that together, were like, this show actually has a pretty big fan base. Maybe we ought to throw the dog some bones, so to speak. So you have like 3 commentary tracks for 3 episodes, and you also have let's see. Yeah, you have 2 featurettes with Geraint Davies and one of the showrunners, one of the co-creators of the show. I forgot the guy's name, I'm sorry to say. But it's the 2 of them sitting down, and I think this was like in 2005. So that's like 1 year after I graduated high school. So it's like way back. But it's the 2 of them, they were sitting down and just talking about the making of the show and how it started out. And I didn't know this until I watched this making of feature, but apparently before the actual show came out, there was a movie called I think it was actually called Nick Knight or Nicholas Knight, or something like that, and it was the same storyline, or it was basically the same storyline as the first 2 episodes of season 1. I mean, with some changes here and there, but in a whole different cast as well. And I found out that with Geraint Davies and the show co-creator were talking about this. Rick Springfield, the musician, Jesse's girl, that guy. He was the one who was originally playing Nick Knight, and it was just in this movie though. And the movie, like, it was meant to be like sort of a movie / pilot for a TV series, but it never took off. And so initially it was just going to be a standalone movie, it seemed like, because of that. But then when things sort of changed, there was more interest in the storyline. They're like, hey, if we made some changes here, this might actually be a good show. And so there was a whole new change as far as the cast goes. And in fact, the only person that stayed the same in this cast was John Kapelos, because he played Schanke in the in the pilot, or what should have been, or what was kind of the pilot movie with Rick Springfield, and he also went on to play Schanke in the Forever Night TV series. And so, without having watched that, up until this time, I had no idea about that. So I'm like, that would have been interesting to see. And after having listened to that and or watched this little thing here, I'm just curious, just real quick, if anyone knows if that particular movie was any good, the one with Rick Springfield. I'm guessing that it would have been interesting seeing Rick Springfield as Nick Knight, but ultimately, Geraint Davies, I think, was definitely the better choice to play Nick Knight. So you find out stuff like that, and you also find out bits about the 3rd season. Because even though this featurette is in the 2nd season DVD set, they talk about the series as a whole. And so unfortunately, at least for me, there were some spoilers as far as the 3rd season goes, so I kind of know how the 3rd season ends, unfortunately. I still want to see it. I've got the 3rd season. I'm definitely going to be watching that next. But at the same time, because I know how it ends now, I'm kind of like, oh God, no. Anyway though, So there are some spoilers in that regard, but at the same time, though, it was really cool, just seeing, Geraint and the show co-creator, just, sitting down and reminiscing, talking about things, and, you know, the fun they had on the show, and one of the funny things I thought was Geraint, looking back, one of the things he's talking about how fun it was, getting to wear different kinds of wigs, like for the flashbacks. He said, the flashbacks were sort of one of the best parts of the show, because, that was one of the things that, they wanted to, do it to make the show stand out from other cop shows. Because it would have been unique enough at the time just to have, a cop who happened to be a vampire, but they went, and did the whole bit where, you had, Nick's flashbacks to the past, and so that way, the wardrobe department, the production, team, got to, play around and have, their fun with, setting up locations from different eras or different time periods and things like that. And, that's one of the reasons why, Forever Night, I think, is, as fondly remembered as it is. That's one of the reasons, mind you, but it's just the fact that because of this effort by the production team to, have things set in the past, like say with the flashbacks, it made the show stand out on a visual level. And so I just thought that was really cool that they, amongst all the other things you find out about, the making of the show in this little featurette, you find out that that was one of the things that they were committed to, making stand out in this show. And so I was like, all right, that's cool. And there's also a featurette called Questions from the Fans, and I believe it was taken from the same interview, because once again it's Geraint and the same showrunner and co-creator sitting down together in the same clothes, same room. So I'm pretty sure this was the same interview from 2005, but they have some questions from the fans, some of which were submitted via the internet, I believe. But you find out some interesting things, like Nick's caddy, the Cadillac, the green Cadillac he has in the show. There wasn't just one of them. There were in fact 3 of them. Now, as far as the show's concerned, in show, that is, there's only one Cadillac, but in real life, though, there were 3 of them for different scenes and what have you, different situations. But I thought that was interesting. It kind of made me think of. I watched. Sorry, just real quick. Bruce Campbell, not that long ago, did a Reddit Ask Me Anything about Ash versus Evil Dead and the Evil Dead series in general, as well as just his life as an actor. And one of the questions that he had was something about the car from the Evil Dead series. And oh crap, I should remember what kind of car it was in the Evil Dead series that Ash had. But basically, he was talking about how while they used more than one car, for certain scenes and everything, the original car still does exist. And so, it made me think of that. When they were talking about, Nick's caddy and the significance of that and how there was more than one of them. It kind of gave me a flashback to that, Bruce Campbell, Reddit Ask Me Anything. So, horror geek moment. But yeah, anyway, though, so as far as, the DVD set itself, I would say it's definitely better in quality in terms of, the fact that it actually has some special features. That was definitely, and these features were definitely geared, towards the fans of the show, because, I haven't listened to the commentary tracks yet, but, the featurette where Geraint and the showrunner are sitting down talking about the show, you find out a lot about the show and from people who are actually involved with the show, and so that was pretty cool. And plus, as far as the season itself, like I said, I mean, overall, it was good, but it stands above season 1 in the sense that there were actually some standout great episodes. But I'm gonna go ahead and give season 2 of Forever Night 4 out of 5 stars. It was good, and I definitely want to see how things go with season 3, even though unfortunately I kind of already know because of the stuff I heard when the about the show featurette. But it's, I mean, I'm wanting to see it through to the end, so I will be watching that next. But thank you very much for taking the time to check out my review. If you got any questions, comments, please feel free to drop me a line, let me know. And if you like what you see here, please feel free to subscribe. And I can't talk, sorry. But yeah, just if you like what you see here, please feel free to subscribe. And I hope you all have a good evening and a good night. Bye.